Welcome back to Criminological Theory. We're going to look at this week the feminist models of crime. You're going to notice that anytime you explore criminology and any type of criminological theory, that eventually there's an entire chapter dedicated to literally what is now statistically one of the largest population in a society around the world, which is women, and particularly how a lot of theorists came to understand the connection not just of women who commit crimes, but also to the connection to this gender ratio problem, as it's called. Why are there more men committing crimes than women? I often remark, much like with the Marxism chapter, that some things may be considered controversial, but obviously, like I said, that when you explore criminology, you have to explore everything. So I hope that this lecture is still useful to you. With feminist criminology, we start off by looking at mainstream feminism. And there's some controversy with this point, mostly because what is understood to be mainstream feminism. So I give you the definition here. When we are looking at this idea, this aspect of what feminism is, it's not necessarily to just again what is perceived. The reason why it's controversial is that basically like, well, then feminists don't like men, and that they, basically want to like get rid of men or eradicate men. That's not actually true. What it is it's calling for change in the way the laws are passed and the customs are created to give women more position of privilege and power, that to have a place in society that speaks more to them. So in the other theories where they looked at class structure, whether it's economic or even social status, and then power, which includes politics, now we're just going to look at gender and power, right? So we're going to look at some of the differences there. The concepts come back to some key things. So if you're writing notes, you're going to see them here. Chivalry and paternalism. Early on, feminist theorists argued that men basically put women on a pedestal. And because they were placed on a pedestal, they were treated differently. And because they were treated differently, including in the criminal justice system, some of it was unfair. And some of it created a power imbalance. So basically, with the paternalism, and this happened a lot in some aspects of the criminal justice system, especially with male judges and female offenders, they wanted to basically help the women for their own good. So as you see here, it implies men are independent and women are dependent. So we're already creating a power imbalance in gender and power when we're talking about aspects of understanding crime and place in society. It also looks at this idea of the patriarchy, right? That women are basically subordinate and they are lesser than the men, right? So this also is a point that has created a lot of controversy in modern society because of what people come to understand what this definition of patriarchy means and this idea of subordinates. One of the things you see is that the feminist models of crime argue that there's a problem of generalizability. With labeling, what's argued in feminist model theories of crime, you can't explain why women don't engage in some of the same acts of deviance like men. And on top of that, that there is deviance in the first place. So what you're automatically saying here with this generalizability problem is it can't explain the gender crime ratio issue. Also, feminist models theories of crime do uniformly, many of the theories have some attachment to Marxism in terms of attacking it. They don't like it because they say they don't focus on working class women. So there used to be an argument that a lot of feminist theorists in this model of crime automatically just were Marxists. That's not actually always true. They had an attachment to it in terms of critiquing it, right? They didn't like capitalism, right? But they also, too, don't really like Marxism as much. While there are some feminist theorists of crime who do like Marxism, not all of them did. And they said, again, as you see here, it's because it's neglecting the gender issue, that there still is exploitation, and it still can't explain why they commit far less crime, because it was just about exploitation for the working class, that women should commit the same amount of crimes as men. So what it becomes is a discussion around gender ratio. Why are there a difference in the offending rate? Is it biological? Well, the biological sciences deny it. And the modern mainstream feminists also state that women are also socialized in the same way as males in a modern society. And we have seen that. We have seen a greater change in which women are being either we're raising children gender neutral in society, or we are raising children the same as we do men, and they do not have the same rates of criminal offending. As a matter of fact, whether you look at the United States specific or the world specific for something as serious as like homicide, it still is a pretty high ratio when we're talking about males who are committing an offense versus females. This goes back to our first lecture in the UCR. So when you automatically have a huge difference and you don't have the same, you're going to have some problems with an assertion that if they're raised the same, they're going to offend the same. Also, too, you do have different measures of feminist theories of crime. One of them is called liberal feminism, as you see here. So that was really what you saw, an outgrowth of that in society was the Me Too movement. But it did have connections to theorists by the name of Simon and Adler, who looked at this idea of gender discrimination and women liberation and wanting to have equal power in work and in the law. There is, like I said, some Marxist feminism, where not all of them agree. Like I said before, they have critiques about Marxism, but some do like Marxism and say that it can exploit people, particularly through capitalism, through race and gender, that women are treated as tokens. So Marxist feminism takes this even further to argue that crime is a result of two very particular things that you see there on the slide, which is quite interesting, right? Because they're breaking it down as a natural division between sexual perceptions and sexual behaviors, and then also, two, who's allowed to own property. Now, in the United States, until there was laws actually passed to equalize women's place in society, there was a lot for a very long time, women didn't have access to distribution of property, including base level things into the early 1970s, where women couldn't have a checking or savings account on her own. She needed a male counterpart to sign off on it. So we do know there has been issues with this in society, and the Marxists looked at it in that measure. There are also, outside the Marxist, socialist feminism, where they say, looking at the patriarchy and class, that women are exploited for labor and sexuality. There are radical feminists who don't like the liberal, and they actually want men and women to be completely separated. So the question I often ask then, and it's the same thing that the radical feminists ask in this aspect, is they ask this question to the rest of women: are women their own worst enemies? And that's not me. I asked that on the slide because that's what the radical feminists will often ask. And they basically state that because women are not seeking enough to basically separate men versus women and have their own laws created, that they are creating a system of exploitation. What this all builds into is, what is the evidence for these feminist theories? Well, believe it or not, when women are given equal opportunity, they don't offend. When women were not liberated or given equal opportunity, they did commit crimes. So what it started to see was studies started to look at it and say, well, why is there a gender ratio problem? Well, Daly and Chesney Lind are two theorists who led a couple different studies, and they found some rather unique things. Their first point is one that is controversial in the time period of 2024, the fact that they looked at gender as a social construct. So not as a biological fact, right, in terms of a natural fact. They said there's biological sex differences, but It's a social construct. So then when they looked at gender and gender relations, they said that's how we break everything down. And at the end of the day, it's a construct of masculinity. So then there is some superiority of men. The knowledge of that we have today is coming from men, and that women were not at the center of intellectual integrity or inquiry. So then they were greater impacted. And what they found was, in essence, that is why women would commit crime. An interesting theory, especially in a time where women have become more, obviously, independent and given their own responsibilities. The critiques are pretty uniform in that by the 1960s, even women of color were challenging feminism because they were not experiencing the same things as the white middle class women, and they weren't being taken into account. It still doesn't answer the gender ratio problem, right? Why do we have a difference? There's a categorization of women as offenders or victims, but it doesn't give an understanding of women who commit crime. And with the policy implications, the research has shown that we actually need to empower women. That even though we can't explain the gender ratio specifically, we still need to actually give women a position of authority and power in society, not just try to divide. And we need to create alternative institutions that also protect women from those who mean to do them harm. I hope this was helpful for your understanding of the feminist models and theories of crime.